The stars looked different from the bridge of the Zephyrian warship. Commander Vextar pressed his clawed hand against the viewing window and smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth that could tear through metal. For 3,000 years, his people had ruled the galaxy. They were the hunters. Everyone else was prey. Vextar stood 9 feet tall, his dark skin covered in scales that could stop laser fire. His yellow eyes could see in complete darkness, and his hearing could pick up a heartbeat from a mile away. He was the perfect predator, just like every other member of his species. The Zephyrians had evolved on a world where only the strongest survived, and now they brought that same law to the entire galaxy. Behind him, his hunting party prepared their weapons. 20 of the finest killers in the Empire, each one capable of destroying an entire city single-handedly. They had wiped out hundreds of species across 17 star systems. Some fought back. Some tried to hide. Some begged for mercy. None of it mattered. The hunt always ended the same way. "Commander," said Sub-Hunter Krellinash, approaching with a datapad, "the High Council has sent us new prey." Vextar took the device and studied the information. Images showed a blue and green world orbiting a yellow star. The planet looked beautiful, but the data told a different story. High gravity, violent weather, deadly creatures everywhere. The galactic database marked it as a death world, a place so dangerous that most species couldn't even visit it without dying. "Humans," Vextar read aloud. "Bipedal mammals. Average height 6 feet. No natural weapons. No armor plating." He laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "The Council wants us to hunt creatures from a death world? This should be entertaining." The report continued. Humans had just developed faster than light travel. They were spreading out from their deadly home world, building colonies and exploring nearby star systems. They showed unusual intelligence and adaptability, but they were still primitive compared to most galactic civilizations. "What makes them special?" asked Krellinash. Vextar scrolled through more data. Humans had survived on Earth for millions of years, despite facing constant threats. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, massive predators, disease, and countless wars with each other. Somehow, they not only survived, but grew stronger each time they faced extinction. "They're survivors," Vextar said. "The Council wants to know if survivors make better prey than the usual weaklings we hunt." 3 star systems away, Jake Harrison was having a very normal day. He guided his cargo ship through the emptiness between worlds, hauling supplies to the mining colony on Kepler 442b. The ship wasn't much to look at, old, patched up, and held together more by habit than engineering. But it was his, and it got the job done. Jake was 35 years old with brown hair and tired green eyes. He had served 8 years in the Colonial Marines before becoming a civilian pilot. The military had taught him how to fight, how to survive, and how to never give up no matter how bad things got. Those lessons had kept him alive through the brutal Titan Wars, where human soldiers fought against impossible odds on a dozen different worlds. Now he just wanted to haul cargo and stay out of trouble. The mining colonies paid well for basic supplies, and the routes were usually safe. No pirates, no military patrols asking questions, and no one shooting at him. After years of war, boring was exactly what Jake wanted. His ship's computer chimed softly. Incoming vessel detected. Range, 50,000 kilometers and closing. Jake frowned and checked his sensors. The ship approaching him was unlike anything in the colonial database. It was sleek and predatory looking, like a metal shark swimming through space. Its energy signature was completely unknown, and it wasn't responding to his radio calls. "Unknown vessel, this is cargo hauler Delta 7. Please identify yourself and state your intentions." Silence. The alien ship moved closer, its flight pattern too deliberate to be accidental. Jake had seen enough combat to recognize hunting behavior when he saw it. Something was stalking him. Jake's hands moved automatically to his ship's defensive systems. The cargo hauler wasn't a warship, but it had basic shields and a few light weapons for protection against pirates. Not much, but better than nothing. Computer. Activate emergency protocols. Send a distress signal on all colonial frequencies. Emergency beacon activated. Colonial patrol ship UCS Defiant will receive the signal in approximately 4 hours. 4 hours. Jake looked at his sensors again. The alien ship would reach him in less than 10 minutes. On the Zephyrian hunting vessel, Vextar watched his prey with growing interest. The human ship was small and obviously designed for cargo transport rather than combat. Perfect for a first test. He wanted to see how humans fought when cornered, how they reacted to fear, and how long they could survive against superior predators. Launch boarding pods, Vextar ordered. Disable their engines, but don't destroy the ship. I want the human alive for questioning. 3 smaller craft detached from the Zephyrian ship and moved toward Jake's cargo hauler. Each pod carried 5 hunters armed with energy weapons and centuries of killing experience. They expected the human to surrender quickly once he realized he was OUTMATC. ED. Jake watched the boarding pods approach and made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of trying to run or sending out surrender signals, he did something that no other species had ever done when facing the Zephyrians. He got angry. Computer, seal all bulkheads except sections 7 through 12. Vent the atmosphere from sections 1 through 6 and 13 through 20. Authorization. Harrison, Jake, Colonial Marine Service number 77,439. Are you certain? This action will make most of the ship uninhabitable. Do it, and activate the automated cargo systems. I want those magnetic cranes and loading arms ready for manual control. Jake had spent his military career fighting in impossible situations. The Titan Wars had taught every colonial marine that you used whatever you had, wherever you were, with whatever worked. A cargo ship wasn't a battleship, but it was still a weapon if you knew how to use it. The Zephyrian boarding pods, attached to his hull with metallic clangs that echoed through the ship. Jake could hear cutting tools beginning to work on his outer doors. In a few minutes, the aliens would break through and expect to find a terrified human waiting to be captured. Instead, they would find something that had never existed in there. 3,000 years of galactic dominance. They would find a human who had decided to fight back. Jake grabbed his service pistol from its storage locker and checked the ammunition. 18 rounds of standard military ammo designed to stop human-sized targets. He had no idea if it would even scratch whatever was trying to break into his ship, but he was going to find out. The first boarding pod finished cutting through the outer hull. Jake could hear heavy footsteps moving through the sections he had vented. The aliens were big, probably much bigger than humans, and they moved with the confidence of creatures that had never met anything they couldn't kill. They were about to learn that humans were different. Not because they were stronger or faster or tougher, but because they had spent millions of years being hunted by everything on Earth, and they had survived by refusing to give up. Jake smiled grimly and moved toward the first choke point he had prepared. The aliens wanted to hunt a human? Fine, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had chosen to hunt Jake Harrison, and Jake Harrison had never learned how to quit. The first Zephyrian through the breach expected to find a cowering human. Instead, Sub-Hunter Thekmer found himself in a pitch-black corridor filled with floating debris. The human had vented the atmosphere from this section, turning it into a zero-gravity maze of twisted metal and cargo containers. Thekmer activated his suit's lights and pushed forward. His people had evolved as nocturnal hunters, so darkness meant nothing to him. His enhanced vision could see clearly in conditions that would blind most species. But as he moved deeper into the ship, something felt wrong. The debris wasn't random. It was positioned too perfectly, creating blind spots and narrow passages that forced him to move in predictable patterns. Jake watched the alien through a maintenance camera feed. The creature was exactly what he had feared, massive, heavily armed, and moving with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Its scaled skin looked tough enough to stop small arms fire, and the energy weapon in its claws could probably punch through the ship's hull. But Jake had advantages too. This was his ship, and he knew every bolt, every wire, and every system. More importantly, he had 8 years of military experience fighting in close quarters against superior enemies. The colonial Marines had a saying: adapt, improvise, overcome. Jake was about to put that philosophy to the test. The alien moved past the first junction, following the main corridor toward the ship's center. Jake waited until it was exactly where he wanted it, then activated the cargo bay's magnetic loading system. The powerful electromagnets, designed to move tons of metal containers, suddenly reversed polarity. Vecmar felt his weapon torn from his grasp as every piece of metal in the corridor became a projectile. His armor's magnetic components locked onto the ship's hull, pinning him in place while debris crashed around him. For the first time in his centuries-long life, the Zephyrian hunter felt helpless. Jake didn't waste the opportunity. He opened an emergency hatch and dropped into the corridor behind the trapped alien. His service pistol boomed 3 times in the confined space. The bullets sparked off the creature's armor, but didn't penetrate. However, the impact was enough to disorient it. The alien spun around with impossible speed, claws extending toward Jake's throat. But Jake was already moving, rolling under the swipe and triggering the emergency bulkhead seal. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the alien's escape route and trapping it in a section of corridor barely large enough for its massive frame. On the Zephyrian ship, Vextar watched his hunter's life signs with growing concern. Vecmar's vitals showed stress and confusion, emotions no Zephyrian should feel while hunting inferior prey. The commander opened a communication channel. "Report, Vecmar. What is your status?" Static answered him. The human ship was interfering with their communication somehow, using its own systems to jam the Zephyrian frequencies. Vextar's yellow eyes narrowed. No prey species had ever been clever enough to disrupt their technology before. Jake moved through his ship's maintenance tunnels, staying ahead of the other boarding parties. He could hear them moving through the corridors, their heavy footsteps echoing in the enclosed spaces. They were spreading out, searching for him systematically. Good hunters, but they were hunting on his territory now. The second group of aliens had entered through the cargo bay. Jake watched them on his security monitors as they advanced in perfect formation, covering each other's movements with military precision. These weren't just predators, they were soldiers. Professional killers who had probably conquered entire worlds, but they had never fought in a cargo ship's loading bay before. Jake activated the automated systems he had prepared. Massive mechanical arms, designed to move shipping containers, began swinging through the air in seemingly random patterns. The aliens dodged easily at first, their enhanced reflexes making them almost impossible to hit. But Jake wasn't trying to hit them directly. He was hurting them. The cargo bay's floor was divided into sections that could be opened to space for loading and unloading. Jake had programmed the mechanical arms to drive the aliens toward specific areas, then triggered the floor hatches. 3 of the 5 hunters found themselves falling into empty cargo holds, the heavy doors sealing above them. The remaining 2 aliens realized they were being manipulated and tried to retreat. But Jake had sealed the exits, trapping them in the cargo bay with the still-moving mechanical arms. The hunters were fast enough to avoid the machinery, but they couldn't advance or retreat. They were stuck. Hunter Krellinash, leading the 3rd boarding party, had entered through the ship's engine section. He was the most experienced of Vextar's hunters, with over 200 successful kills to his credit. He moved carefully. Through the maze of pipes and machinery, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of the human dot. The engine room was hot and noisy, filled with the rumble of fusion reactors and life support systems. Krellinash could smell the human scent, fear, sweat, and something else. Something that reminded him of the few prey species that had fought back before dying. Desperation. What Krellinash didn't understand was that humans had learned to weaponize desperation over millions of years of survival. Jake had spent his time in the engine room preparing a trap that would have killed any normal person to set up. But Jake wasn't normal. He was a colonial marine veteran who had survived impossible battles by refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible. The fusion reactor's magnetic containment field was one of the most dangerous systems on the ship. Lose containment, and the superheated plasma would vaporize everything within 100 meters. Jake had carefully modified the field generators, turning them into a weapon that would trigger when the alien reached the exact center of the engine room. Krellinash felt the trap closing around him just as the magnetic field destabilized. The hunter's enhanced reflexes saved his life, throwing him backward just as a tongue of plasma fire erupted from the reactor core. The blast would have killed him instantly, but instead it only caught his left arm, vaporizing it below the elbow. Zephyrian screamed in pain and rage, a sound no hunter had made in centuries. For the first time, one of the galaxy's apex predators had been wounded by what they considered inferior prey. Krellinash stared at his severed arm in shock, unable to process what had happened. Jake's voice echoed through the ship's intercom system, speaking in clear, calm English that the aliens' translation systems converted automatically. "I don't know who you are or why you're on my ship," Jake said, "but you picked the wrong human to hunt. I've fought things scarier than you in places worse than this. You want me? Come and get me, but understand that I'm not prey. I'm a colonial marine, and we don't surrender." 40 light years away, Lieutenant. Lisa Carter was monitoring communications aboard the patrol ship UCS Defiant when Jake's emergency beacon reached them. The automated distress call included sensor data showing an unknown vessel attacking the civilian cargo hauler. Lisa immediately recognized the tactical situation and ordered her ship to maximum acceleration, but even at top speed, they were still hours away from Jake's position. Lisa could only monitor the situation and hope that whoever was attacking the cargo ship would keep the pilot alive long enough for help to arrive. On his ship, Jake reloaded his pistol and checked his remaining supplies. 3 magazines of ammunition, some basic tools, and whatever he could improvise from the ship's systems. Against normal pirates or raiders, it wouldn't be nearly enough. But Jake had learned long ago that winning wasn't about having better equipment. It was about refusing to lose. The aliens had superior technology, better weapons, and physical advantages that made them nearly impossible to kill in a straight fight. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that being apex predators made them invincible. They had never encountered a species that had survived by making everything around them into a weapon. Jake smiled grimly and moved toward his next prepared position. The aliens wanted to hunt him? Fine, but they were about to learn why humans were the most dangerous prey in the galaxy. Commander Vextar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His hunting party's status lights showed injuries, confusion, and something he had never seen before in 3,000 years of Zephyrian dominance: fear. Hunter Krellinash was wounded and trapped in the engine room. 3 hunters were sealed in cargo holds. 2 more were pinned down in the loading bay. And Ekmer hadn't reported in for over an hour. This was supposed to be a simple test hunt. 1 human against 20 of the galaxy's most deadly predators. The outcome should have been decided within minutes. Instead, his hunters were being systematically outmaneuvered by a single member of what the galactic database called a primitive species. "Commander," came Krellinash's voice over the radio, weak with pain and shock. Request immediate medical. Evacuation. The human. The human used his own ship's reactor as a weapon. My left arm is gone. Vexter's scaled hands clenched into fists. In all his centuries of hunting, no prey had ever wounded one of his hunters. The very idea was unthinkable. Prey ran, hid, or died. They didn't fight back with the cunning and ruthlessness of apex predators. All hunters knew orders, Vextar broadcast. The human is more dangerous than anticipated. Use maximum caution and lethal force. Do not underestimate this creature. Inside the cargo ship, Jake was learning about his enemies with each encounter. They were fast, strong, and tough, but they had weaknesses. They hunted like creatures that had never faced serious opposition. They expected their prey to be afraid, to make mistakes, to act predictably. Jake was doing none of those things. He had grown up on Earth, where everything was trying to kill you. Hurricanes, earthquakes, predatory animals, disease, and sometimes other humans. Earth's children learned early that survival meant using your brain when your body wasn't strong enough. Jake was applying millions of years of human evolution to a problem the Zephyrians had never encountered before. The alien trapped in the forward corridor was trying to cut through the bulkhead with his energy weapon. Jake watched through the security cameras as the creature methodically sliced through the reinforced metal. It would take time, but eventually the alien would break free. Jake needed to end this threat permanently. The ship's fire suppression system was designed to flood compartments with carbon dioxide to extinguish flames. Jake rerouted the system's controls and began pumping CO2 into the sealed corridor. The alien didn't notice at first, focused on cutting through the door. By the time the creature realized what was happening, the corridor was filled with suffocating gas. Thekmer clawed at his throat, his enhanced lungs struggling to extract oxygen from the poisoned air. The Zephyrian's superior physiology meant he could hold his breath longer than most species, but eventually even he would have to breathe. Jake watched coldly as the alien's movements became sluggish, then stopped entirely. 1 down. 12 to go. The 2 hunters in the cargo bay had managed to destroy the mechanical loading arms, but they were still trapped by the sealed doors. Jake activated the bay's electromagnetic systems, turning the floor into a massive magnet. The aliens' weapons and equipment were pulled down with crushing force, pinning them in place. Then Jake opened the outer cargo doors. The rush of escaping atmosphere grabbed everything not magnetically secured and hurled it into space. The 2 Zephyrians, anchored to the floor by their own equipment, could only watch helplessly as their weapons and life support systems were torn away. They had perhaps 10 minutes of air left in their suits. Jake's voice echoed through the cargo. Bay's speakers. You can surrender now, or you can suffocate. Your choice. For the first time in Zephyrian history, apex predators raised their hands in surrender. The 3 aliens trapped in the cargo holds were trying to cut their way out, but Jake had prepared for that too. He flooded their compartments with coolant from the ship's environmental systems. The super-chilled liquid wouldn't kill the aliens immediately, but it would slow them down and make their equipment malfunction. They would be unconscious from hypothermia long before they could escape. On the bridge of the UCS Defiant, Lieutenant Lisa Carter pushed her ship's engines beyond their safety limits. The patrol vessel shuddered as its fusion drives operated at maximum output, but they were still 3 hours away from Jake's position. Lisa had been monitoring the sporadic radio transmissions from the battle, trying to piece together what was happening. Captain, she called to her commanding officer. I'm picking up more signals from the unknown vessel. It sounds like they're calling for reinforcements. Captain Ben Walsh studied the tactical display. His ship was fast but lightly armed, designed for patrol duty rather than combat. If more alien vessels were coming, the Defiant would be outgunned. But they couldn't abandon a civilian in distress. Send a message to Colonial Command, Walsh ordered. Tell them we have first contact with a hostile alien species. Request immediate military support. Back on the cargo ship, Jake was running low on tricks. He had eliminated or neutralized most of the boarding party, but reinforcements would be coming soon. The alien ship was still attached to his hull, and he could hear cutting tools working on multiple entry points. Fresh hunters were preparing to board, but Jake had one more advantage the aliens didn't know about. He was angry. Humans were unusual among galactic species because they could function effectively while experiencing strong emotions. Most creatures became clumsy or made poor decisions when afraid or angry. Humans became more focused, more creative, and more dangerous. Jake's anger was cold and precise, sharpening his tactical thinking rather than clouding it. He made his way to the ship's medical bay and gathered supplies, not for treating wounds, but for making weapons. Medical alcohol was highly flammable. Surgical instruments were sharp and light. Diagnostic equipment contained high-voltage electrical systems. Jake began assembling improvised weapons that would have been impossible for any other species to create or use effectively. The next wave of Zephyrian hunters entered through the ship's ventilation system, trying to avoid the traps Jake had set in the main corridors. They moved through the narrow air ducts with the fluid grace of natural predators, their enhanced senses tracking the human scent through the maze of metal passages. They found Jake in the ship's mess hall, apparently cornered with nowhere to run. The lead hunter, Sub-Commander Velthur, smiled with satisfaction. Finally, they had the human trapped in an open space where their superior speed and strength would decide the battle. "Surrender, human," Velthur commanded, his energy weapon aimed at Jake's chest. "You have fought well for prey, but this ends now." Jake looked at the 5 aliens surrounding him and smiled. "You're right. This does end now." He pressed a button on the device in his hand. The mess hall's lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. But Jake had spent the last hour preparing for this moment. He had memorized the exact position of every table, chair, and fixture. He had calculated angles and distances. He had turned the room into a killing ground designed specifically for fighting creatures that relied on enhanced senses. The improvised flashbang grenades Jake had made from medical supplies exploded simultaneously, overloading the alien-sensitive hearing and vision. The electromagnetic pulse from the ship's diagnostic equipment disrupted their suit systems. The superheated surgical instruments, launched by compressed air from the life support system, found gaps in their armor with surgical precision. When the lights came back on, Jake was the only one still standing. Velthur, dying from wounds that should have been impossible for a human to inflict, looked up at Jake with something approaching respect. What are you?" Jake reloaded his pistol and looked down at the alien commander. "I'm a human. We're the species that everything on our planet tried to kill, and we're still here. You made one mistake when you decided to hunt us." "What mistake?" Velthur whispered. "You assumed we were prey," Jake said. "But we've never been prey. We've always been the predators." Commander Vextar stood alone on his ship's bridge, staring at the tactical display that showed the death of his hunting party. 20 of the finest killers in the Zephyrian Empire, destroyed by a single human using nothing but a cargo ship and his own cunning. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. It was happening. The commander's claws scraped against the metal console as he tried to process what he had witnessed. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrians had been the ultimate apex predators. They had wiped out entire species without losing a single hunter. They had turned the galaxy into their personal hunting ground, and no prey had ever posed a real threat to them, until now. Vextar activated his ship's long-range communications, sent an emergency message to the Zephyrian High Council. His report was brief and shocking. The humans were not prey. They were something else entirely. Something dangerous. On Earth, The message from Lieutenant Carter reached Colonial Command just as Admiral Patricia Stone was reviewing defense budgets. In her office, the Admiral was a tough woman who had spent 30 years in the colonial military, fighting pirates and rebels across human space. She thought she had seen everything the galaxy could throw at humanity. She was wrong. "Admiral," her aide said, bursting into the office without knocking, "we have an emergency. First contact with an unknown alien species. They attacked one of our cargo ships." Admiral Stone read the report twice, trying to understand what she was seeing. Hostile aliens with superior technology had attacked a civilian vessel. The pilot, a former Marine named Jake Harrison, was somehow fighting them, off using improvised tactics. But the most disturbing part was the data from the alien ship's communications. The aliens weren't pirates or raiders. They were hunters. Professional killers who traveled the galaxy looking for new species to exterminate. And they had chosen humanity as their next target. "Get me the President," Admiral Stone ordered. "And activate Protocol 7. I want every ship we have ready for combat in the next 6 hours." On the Zephyrian home world, the High Council received Vextar's report with a mixture of disbelief and rage. The council consisted of the 12 oldest and most successful hunters in Zephyrian history. Between them, they had personally killed millions of beings across hundreds of worlds. They had never faced a species that could fight back effectively. High Hunter Zichthel, the eldest member of the council, studied the tactical data from the battle. The human had used creativity and intelligence to overcome physical disadvantages. He had turned his own ship into a weapon and used the Zephyrians' assumptions against them. It was exactly the kind of dangerous thinking that made a species a threat to the natural order. "This cannot be allowed to continue," Zichthel declared. "If other species learn that prey can defeat predators, the entire galaxy will fall into chaos. The humans must be eliminated immediately." The council voted unanimously. The Grand Fleet would be dispatched to the human home world. Earth would be sterilized from orbit, and every human colony would be destroyed. The galaxy would remember why the Zephyrians were the ultimate apex predators. Meanwhile, Jake was preparing for the next phase of the battle. He had defeated the boarding party, but Vextar's ship was still attached to his hull. The alien commander would either retreat or try something desperate. Jake suspected it would be the latter. He was right. Vextar activated his ship's self-destruct sequence and sent a final message to Jake's vessel. "You have fought well, human. But if I cannot claim you as prey, then we will die together as warriors." Jake had 30 seconds before the alien ship exploded, taking his cargo hauler with it. Most people would have panicked or given up. Jake Harrison was not most people. He was a colonial Marine who had learned to solve impossible problems under pressure. The ship's escape pods were designed to save the crew if the main vessel was destroyed. But they were also equipped with small thrusters for maneuvering and basic life support systems. Jake ran through the corridors of his dying ship, gathering emergency supplies and activating the separation sequence for the cargo pods. 20 seconds. Jake reached the primary cargo pod and began the emergency launch sequence. The pod's computer protested that the ship was still structurally intact, but Jake overrode the safety systems with his military authorization codes. 10 seconds. The cargo pod blasted away from the ship, just as Vextar's vessel erupted in a ball of superheated plasma. The explosion vaporized both ships instantly, but Jake's pod was already far enough away to survive the blast wave. Lieutenant Carter watched the explosion through her ship's telescopes, her heart sinking as she realized they were too late. The unknown aliens had destroyed the cargo vessel, and there was no sign of survivors. She ordered her ship to search for escape pods, but held little hope of finding anyone alive. "Contact." Her sensor operator called out. "Small craft bearing 2-7-Mark-4. It's transmitting a colonial identification code. Carter felt a surge of relief as they picked up Jake's emergency pod. The man who had somehow fought off an entire alien boarding party was still alive. But as they brought him aboard the Defiant, Jake's first words weren't about his own survival. "They're coming," Jake told Captain Walsh as soon as he was brought to the bridge. "I managed to access their ship's database before they self-destructed. This wasn't a random attack. They're hunters who travel the galaxy, exterminating entire species. And they've marked humanity for extinction." Captain Walsh studied the data that Jake had managed to download from the alien ship. The files were in an unknown language, but the images were clear enough. Dozens of worlds reduced to ash. Hundreds of species wiped out completely. And detailed plans for something called the cleansing of Earth. "How long do we have?" Walsh asked. Jake pointed to the star charts he had copied. "According to their logs, the main fleet is already on its way. They call it the Grand Fleet, and it's big enough to destroy entire star systems. We have maybe a week before they reach Earth." The news spread through human space like wildfire. Jake Harrison, the cargo pilot who had fought off the galaxy's deadliest hunters, became a symbol of human defiance. His story was broadcast on every colonial news network, and his tactical innovations were studied by military commanders throughout human territory. But the most important effect was psychological. Humans learned that they were not alone in the galaxy, and that the aliens who had found them were not interested in peace or trade. They were predators who saw humanity as nothing more than prey to be hunted and killed. The response was swift and overwhelming. Every human world contributed ships, weapons, and personnel to the defense fleet. Civilian vessels were converted into warships. Mining companies donated their explosive charges for use as space mines. Even merchant captains volunteered to ram alien ships if necessary. Captain Ryan Murphy, commanding the heavy cruiser UCS Ranger, was part of the hastily assembled defense fleet that gathered at the edge of the solar system. 53 ships of various sizes and capabilities, facing an enemy force that had conquered most of the galaxy. The odds were impossible, but Murphy had read Jake's report. He understood that humans didn't win by having better odds. They won by refusing to lose. The waiting was the hardest part. For 6 days, the human fleet maintained position while long-range sensors searched for signs of the approaching enemy. Engineers worked around the clock to implement Jake's tactical innovations on a larger scale. Asteroid belts were seeded with hidden explosives. Derelict satellites were converted into remote-controlled missiles. Empty cargo containers were filled with radioactive waste and programmed to ram enemy ships. On the 7th day, the Zephyrian Grand Fleet arrived. The alien Armada was a sight that would have terrified any other species in the galaxy. 1,000 warships arranged in perfect hunting formation, their dark hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. They had destroyed civilizations with forces a tenth this size. Against primitive humans with inferior technology, it should have been a massacre. But as Admiral Stone watched the enemy fleet approach, she smiled grimly. The Zephyrians were about to learn the same lesson that Vextar had learned the hard way. Humans were not prey. They were the species that had looked at a planet full of predators and decided to become the apex predator themselves. The Zephyrian Grand Fleet moved through space like a wall of death. High Hunter Zekthul stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the primitive human ships arrange themselves in what looked like a defensive formation. The humans had only 53 vessels against his 1,000 warships. It would be over quickly. "Begin the cleansing," Zekthul ordered. "Destroy every human ship, then proceed to their home world. Leave nothing alive." The Grand Fleet opened fire with weapons that had shattered moons and boiled oceans. Energy beams that could cut through solid rock reached out toward the human defense line. The Zephyrians expected to see the primitive ships vaporize under the overwhelming assault. Instead, The human fleet scattered like startled fish, breaking formation and fleeing in all directions. Some ships were destroyed in the first volley, but most escaped by using tactics no civilized species had ever employed. They hid behind asteroids, used debris fields as cover, and even flew directly through the exhaust plumes of gas giant planets. To mask their heat signatures, cowards, Zechthel snarled. They run like all prey when faced with superior predators. Hunt them down individually. Admiral Stone watched the tactical display from her command ship, hidden deep in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The Zephyrian fleet was spreading out to chase the scattered human vessels, exactly as she had hoped. The aliens were thinking like hunters pursuing fleeing prey. They weren't thinking like soldiers facing an enemy that might fight back. Phase 2, Stone ordered. All ships, implement the Harrison Protocol. Jake Harrison was aboard the UCS Ranger with Captain Murphy, serving as a tactical advisor. He watched as the human ships began to put his improvisational methods to work on a massive scale. Cargo containers filled with mining explosives drifted toward the alien ships, looking like harmless debris. Abandoned satellites suddenly activated. Hidden engines and rammed into Zephyrian vessels. Even seemingly empty space became dangerous as hidden mines exploded when the aliens passed too close. They're adapting faster than expected, Murphy observed as the Zephyrian fleet began to recognize the traps. We need something bigger, Jake smiled grimly. Phase 3. Time to show them what humans do when we're really angry. The UCS the patrol ship that had rescued Jake, suddenly emerged from behind a large asteroid and fired directly into the engine section of a Zephyrian destroyer. But instead of using energy weapons, the human ship launched something unexpected. Its entire cargo of mining equipment, accelerated to incredible speeds by electromagnetic launchers. The improvised projectiles tore through the alien ship's hull like bullets through paper. The destroyer exploded in a ball of fire, taking 2 nearby vessels with it in the debris cloud. Captain Walsh had turned his patrol ship into a giant shotgun, and it was devastatingly effective at close range. Across the battlefield, other human ships were using similar tactics. The cargo hauler UCS Frontier rammed a Zephyrian cruiser at full speed, its captain laughing over the radio as both ships disintegrated. The mining vessel Deep Dig used its industrial drilling lasers to cut through enemy armor like a hot knife through butter. Even civilian pleasure craft had been converted into suicide bombers, their automated systems programmed to seek out the largest alien ships and detonate. High Hunter Zechthel stared at the tactical display in growing horror. His carefully organized fleet was being torn apart by creatures that fought like rabid animals. The humans used tactics that no civilized species would ever consider: ramming attacks, suicide runs, and weapons improvised from industrial equipment. They seemed to take pleasure in destroying themselves as long as they could take enemies with them. This is impossible, Zechthel whispered. They're supposed to be prey. Prey doesn't fight like this. On the bridge of the UCS Ranger, Jake watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. The Zephyrians were learning what it meant to fight humans. Not the civilized humans who built colonies and traded with other species, but the humans who had crawled out of Earth's primordial chaos and conquered a planet that was actively trying to kill them. Admiral, Jake said into his communicator, it's time for the final phase. Admiral Stone had been saving the best surprise for last. Hidden throughout the solar system were hundreds of automated defense platforms, disguised as communications satellites and navigation beacons. At her signal, they all activated simultaneously and began broadcasting on the same frequency. The signal wasn't a weapon. It was something much worse for the Zephyrians. It was the complete tactical database from Jake's encounter with the first hunting party, along with detailed analysis of Zephyrian weaknesses, broadcast to every human ship in the system. Suddenly, every human captain knew exactly how the aliens moved, how they thought, and how they could be beaten. The scattered defense fleet reformed into hunting packs of their own, using the Zephyrians' own tactics against them. The prey had become predators, and they were very good at it. Captain Murphy led his squadron in a devastating attack on the Zephyrian flagship. The aliens' superior weapons meant nothing when human ships attacked from 6 directions at once, using unpredictable maneuvers that no computer could calculate. The flagship shields collapsed under the coordinated assault, and Murphy's ship delivered the killing blow with a ramming attack that sent both vessels spinning into Jupiter's gravity. High Hunter Zekthul found himself trapped in an escape pod, watching his mighty fleet die around him. Half his ships were destroyed, and the rest were retreating in panic. For the first time in Zephyrian history, the apex predators were running from their prey. But Jake Harrison wasn't finished with them yet. The UCS Ranger, badly damaged but still functional, intercepted Zekthul's escape pod before it could reach the retreating fleet. Jake himself led the boarding party that captured the High Hunter, bringing the galaxy's most feared predator face to face with a simple human cargo pilot. "You," Zekthul snarled when he saw Jake. "You started this madness." Jake looked at the defeated alien commander with cold eyes. "No, you started this when you decided humans were prey. I just finished it." The Battle of the Outer Rim, as historians would later call it, marked the end of Zephyrian dominance and the beginning of humanity's rise as a galactic power. The surviving alien ships limped back to their home worlds with news that would shatter their civilization. The apex predators had been beaten by creatures they considered inferior. In the weeks that followed, the Zephyrian Empire crumbled as subject species learned that their oppressors could be defeated. Rebellions broke out across 17 star systems. The aliens who had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years found themselves fighting for survival against enemies they had created. Jake Harrison returned to Earth as a hero, but he didn't stay long. The galaxy was full of species that had been hunted to near extinction by the Zephyrians, and they needed help rebuilding. Jake volunteered to lead the relief efforts, taking his cargo ship to deliver aid and protection to the survivors. Admiral Stone established the Galactic Protection Council, with humanity as its founding member. The Council's mission was simple: ensure that no species would ever again face extinction at the hands of so-called apex predators. The message humanity sent to the galaxy was clear: Earth's children were no longer just another species struggling to survive. They were the guardians who would protect the weak from the strong. The Zephyrian surrender was broadcast across the galaxy, along with Jake's final message to any other would-be conquerors: "We are humans. We came from a world that tried to kill us every day, and we not only survived but thrived. We learned to turn everything around us into a weapon, including our own refusal to give up. If you think we're prey, you're welcome to try hunting us. But remember, we've never learned how to lose, and we're very good at teaching others how to die." The deadliest apex predators in galactic history had made one fatal error. They had targeted a human, and humans always fought back.